Welcome to the webinar of the ILO Global Business and Disability Network, a new culture for business on disability inclusion. Now, before we start, some notes on the connection. Audiocast quality is subject to your equipment, available bandwidth, and internet traffic. If you experience unsatisfactory audio quality, please use the telephone dial-in option provided in your confirmation and reminder emails. If you have dialed in, operator assistance is available by pressing £0. Closed captioning has been provided for this webinar. The captions stream is located at the bottom of the presentation. During the presentations, you can send questions at any time by using the question and answer window located to the left of the presentation screen. Just type your question at the bottom of the window and then press your enter button to send it. A question and answer session will follow the presentation. It is my pleasure to turn the call over to Stefan Trammell, Senior Disability Specialist at the International Labour Organization. Stefan will be moderating the call and introducing the speakers. Go ahead, please, Stefan.
Yes, good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are. Please be welcome to the first series of webinars the ILO Global Business and Disability Network is organizing on an extremely relevant topic. We will have presentations from 3 speakers today, which I will introduce one after the other, and then we will have a chance for you to send us questions and answers. One of the common issues that we come across when we work with the private sector and persons with disabilities throughout the world is the issue that the most important, the most relevant and difficult barrier to overcome is related to the perceptions that are held in society and within the private sector on the work capacity of persons with disabilities. We therefore decided that should be the first topic to address, and we are addressing it with the support of 3 experts who will help us understand how we can effectively tackle and promote a new culture within business and in society in general, I would say, on disability inclusion. The first speaker is Anne-Sophie Béraud. She is Vice President of the group, Vice President on Inclusion and Diversity within the group of Accor Hotel. She's also the chair of the ILO Global Business and Disability Network this year in 2018. She will set the stage by introducing briefly the global network and will say more about the importance of this new understanding of disability. Anne-Sophie, over to you.
Thank you, Stefan. Hello, everybody. So let me introduce you the Global Business and Disability Network. This network is a platform that lets companies and other organizations come together to share knowledge and motivate each other on disability inclusion. We share expertise, we share best practice, we share everything on disability. Currently, the GBDN network has 25 company members that have signed up a charter on disability, a worldwide charter on disability and inclusion. We also have members that are national business on disability network, as well as non-company members. Well, just if you are interested in GBA network and if you want to see more, let's go to the website. To talk more about this network, I can say that it's really an innovative space that lets us develop different types of conversation around disability. Example, how we can show the business case, and this is very important, and business reason for inclusion of persons with disabilities. And how can we learn from each other about the way to do it in every country. I'm very happy to introduce this first new series of webinars that features best practice and how to scale it up. Concerning the subject of this webinar, the new culture for business on disability inclusion, it's also the importance of changing attitude, understanding, and culture. In disability and inclusion, we see so often that it's understanding and stereotypes that can create barrier. You all have in your organization, you can see that if we see that somebody can do a job, we will never find the way that they go work. If we are people with certain ideas in mind, we can lose talent. On side of this, that we need to challenge some stereotypes and stigma. Why? To stop discriminating, to take measures that bring about equal opportunities. I'm very pleased to leave the place to go on this webinar to Yves Veuillet and Shamshkan Hawashki. So maybe Yves, to start?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Anne-Sophie. Can you move the slides, please? All right. Thank you again, and hello, everyone. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share with you today IBM's approach to facilitate the inclusion of employees with what I call different abilities. As Anne-Sophie mentioned, it's extremely important to have a long-lasting and long-term vision of what it means to be an employer of all, an inclusive employer. And I will now share with you one of the best practices that we've put in place in terms of training of our manager. Could you please move to the next slide? IBM's disability strategy is built around 3 pillars that we call the 3 A's, standing for accessibility, accommodations, and attitude. Today I will focus on the attitude piece, more specifically on the training strategy we have put in place to make our managers what I call disability confident. Before going into the details of the content of our training, I would like to take a couple of minutes to put this training in a more global disability inclusion context. The way I think of my work, or my mission to use a noble word, is to improve IBM's existing programs as well as identifying existing inhibitors to a successful work experience. I think we all agree that the accessibility constraints we have to deal with globally, such as the lack of accessibility of public infrastructure, transportation, technology, and even more importantly, access to education at all levels, remains a major obstacle to the employment of people with disabilities. However, in my view, the most challenging part of a successful disability inclusion strategy is consistently changing attitudes and mindset of people that do have the hiring authorities and opportunities. As Stefan mentioned, there is a cultural dimension to this. That is why I decided to create this 2-hour workshop that I deliver in a face-to-face classroom mode globally, which I will now tell you more about. Next slide, please. My main objective when I run this workshop is that when the managers leave the room after these 2 hours we've spent together, they think about disability differently. And hopefully, the next time they meet with a candidate willing to join IBM who lives with a disability, or if they welcome an employee with a disability to their team, they simply treat him or her like they would with any other candidate or employee. This is as simple and humble as that. In terms of content, the first hour is more academic, where I explain the different cultural perceptions of disability around the world, which I assume most of you have heard about, such as the medical model, the charity model, the equal opportunity model, and so on. And once I have covered all these notions, I help the participants through some videos and open conversations to identify their own unique or multiple control models and hopefully open their mind to view things through a different lens, so that the next time they have a chance to meet with a candidate or an employee with a disability, they will make the effort to revisit their cultural perception of disability, so that it won't be in the way of having a positive and constructive conversation with these persons. I also take the time to explore and review with the participants IBM's existing policies in terms of physical and digital accessibility requirements, processes in place to provide reasonable accommodation and workplace adjustment, internal resources available such as our business resource groups, our HR diversity team in place to support the effort to be an inclusive manager. I think it's really important to insist on the fact that they are not isolated in their effort, and that there is a structure model in place to help them become an inclusive manager. The second hour is more interactive, consisting of experience sharing, whether positive or negative, by the way, and candid conversations among the managers. Sometimes starting such conversations may not be easy, honestly. But what then happens, I show different testimonies from IBM managers around the world in the form of videos that triggers new conversations in the room. What if to establish a climate that will be positive enough to encourage the people in the room to express openly their concern and ask me any questions they may have about any subject, such as performance reviews, accommodation provisions, mental health issues, attitude to work, productivity, you name it. When I created this training, I made sure that its content would be as close to the reality of today as possible. I'm going to be very blunt here. You know, managers are tired to hear the same politically correct messages again and again about the value that people with disabilities bring to the workplace, their ability to innovate, and so on. Of course, these statements are absolutely true. But what our management team truly demands is to be provided with concrete recommendations that they will use every day when interacting with their employees with disabilities in an open and confident manner. I would like to spend a couple of minutes talking about the format of this workshop. As I said already, I deliver this workshop in a face-to-face classroom mode. It's not a technical conversation. We are talking about human interaction, human perceptions, human behaviors. In other words, we are talking about human beings. I'm working along with the IBM's learning team on the creation of an online version to be deployed on the IBM's platform globally. We are leveraging the latest technologies available to try to preserve the human touch of the face-to-face interaction. Intellectually speaking, it's a very interesting exercise to try to translate in the virtual world the key concepts of this workshop that are conveyed in a natural way when we are all in the same room. Next slide, please. In terms of implementation of this workshop, if you want to be successful in your deployment of such training, you need to build your credibility based on the level of satisfaction of the audience, and therefore you need to measure it. In IBM, we now use the Net Promoter Score, or NPS method to do so. I had a chance to deliver this workshop in countries as different as Brazil, the US, Poland, France, Israel, Hungary, Austria, etc. And the feedback was always extremely positive, regardless of the local culture. On this slide, you see an example of the communication we posted on the work portal for managers internally, globally, to raise awareness about this workshop. I have also developed an external version that I deliver upon invitation for clients or business partners. So if you would like to know more about this workshop that I deliver externally, please do not hesitate to contact me, and I'll be glad to discuss with you the content in more details and explore any collaboration opportunities if possible. I would like to conclude my presentation today with this quote that I recently came across, which I found perfect to illustrate what we are discussing today. Everybody is a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it is stupid. Think about it. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Yves, for your presentation. Very interesting. Changing people's minds is definitely a complicated thing, and to try to do that with a large target group. I mean, IBM, if I'm not wrong, has about 400,000 employees, so a big target group. And I was wondering, while listening to your presentation, exactly about the issue that you then addressed, which is how much can you replace the face-to-face interaction with these 20-25 managers each time with this online, with this attempt to come online, and of course through that reach a larger audience. What is your, I mean, I know you're still in the process, if I understand well, of developing that, but what is your expectation in terms of the impact of that versus the face-to-face interaction? Thank you.
Actually, we are going to use the agile principle. We are going to run some iteration and to test with, I would like to have two different pools of testers. One will be those who took the course face-to-face, so they can compare, not only the content, but also the way they perceive content, and come back to me with their feedback. And we'll also have another pool of testers, sorry, who did not take the course, the face-to-face course in the past, and they will also provide their feedback. And so we will have two different sources to compare with, so that we will be able to keep on developing this tool. This is not, one size fits all. It's really about making this, the creation of this workshop something fluid and something that never ends, so that we are able to iterate once again until we are satisfied. It's a complex and long process, but I think it's worth the game, because obviously for budget and logistic reasons, it's not easy for me or other trainers, because I also train other trainers to go around the world. It's not always very easy. So having an online version, each and every employee, especially the managers, will be ideal.
Thank you, Yves. Thank you. That's very useful. Yves has, I'm sure there will be other questions for Yves. We will take them towards the end. Yves, we didn't say, but I'm saying it now. Yves is a Global Disability and Inclusion Program Manager at IBM, and he's also this year the Vice Chair of our Global Network, and will be the Chair of our network next year. And Eve has been also instrumental in having IBM host a meeting in the U.S. in Washington, D.C. next month, in which we will be reaching out to large U.S.-based global companies to engage in conversations with them on disability inclusion and on topics like the one of today, because it's a topic that is relevant everywhere. It's relevant in the U.S. It's also relevant in India. And speaking of India, the next speaker we have is Shashank Avasti. Shashank is co-founder of Vishish. I hope I'm pronouncing all the names in the correct way. Vishish is an Indian organization that promotes the employment of people with disability. It was recognized in The Economist magazine's diversity list. I was just looking at the Vishish website, and it shows a good number of companies with which Vishish is working in order to promote the employment of people with disabilities. Shashank, I'm looking forward to your presentation and to have a better understanding of the way in which you deal with the same challenges we have been discussing in your interaction with Indian companies. Shashank, the floor over to you.
Thank you so much, Stefan. It's a pleasure to be part of the webinar. Eve is a very tough act to follow, but I'll do the next best thing, which is to share our experiences and what we have learned from interacting with employers. So the entire conversation around the barriers is best understood from the perspective of the job seekers and how progressive employers, like the members of GBDN, are now trying to be able to facilitate them joining the workforce in high quality jobs, which is what we are blessed to be a part of. I'm going to talk about what we've learned from discussions with over 100 odd employer organizations that we've worked with. We're fortunate that, and I just happened to count day before, that we worked with nearly a third of the members of the GBDN, and I hope that we will add more as we sort of go along here. And just like Eve said, what people are looking for is very concrete and specific ideas. They're not looking for very global ideas about how persons with disabilities can contribute, etc. I think there's adequate research about inclusive companies and organizations delivering outstanding and superior financial results. So I think that is an argument that is somewhat proven. And then we come down to how do you really think about the barriers that are out there, and then how do we address these barriers as we go along. In the interest of time, we picked 3 barriers that we tend to hear about most often in our conversations. The first is the safety bias. Why would I want to hire a person with disability? What if something goes wrong? The second one is completely the other side of the spectrum, which is this positive stereotyping around how they could be superhuman in their ability to deliver outstanding results, or they could make no mistake, or nothing could ever go wrong with them because of how good they are, etc., etc. And then at the more practical level, the question of, are there more costs? Am I going to have to do something which I wasn't doing till now? And why do I need to do that and add costs of inclusion, if I may call it that, to the operations of my unit, which is what individual managers would think of? And then why do I need to do that from an enterprise standpoint as well? So, simply put, one of the conversations that we have is to say that hiring a person with disability is primarily a hiring decision. The fact that you're hiring a person with disability needs to be looked at in the context that disability is just one facet of a professional that you're speaking to see whether they will fit in culturally and from a skill standpoint in your business. And therefore, there are no risks other than those relating to hiring any other individual. So if you're not prepared, which the kind of employer that we work for is not usually the case, or you might need to make some accommodations for which they're prepared, then this is really about being able to make your hiring process more robust. So in many ways, by engaging in this conversation, you can sharpen the hiring ability of the organization and attract better and superior talent by focusing only on the individual and not looking at whatever the disabilities that most people tend to focus on, and not on the skills or the background or the experience. Secondly, this whole thing about superhuman quality. The same point becomes relevant here as well. Please do not have misplaced expectations, either from a sympathy or a charity standpoint, that they would do lesser, but the same that they would do outstanding, or they would be. So I know that in emerging markets, for example, persons with disabilities tend to stay on in their jobs longer than others. But that is a function also of the limited opportunities that they have. And if you're looking for true and mainstream inclusion, then they should have as many choices as anybody else would have. So in that sense, please do not have any different expectations that you would have from any other individual that you're hiring. And then the third point, which becomes, I think, very critical to understand, is that there are, on the face of it sometimes, that there may be costs that the organization may not be incurring. But mind you, these costs are reflected in the superior financial and business performance that businesses deliver. So it's very important that leaders who are talking about being an inclusive organization truly deliver and say that, look, we understand that when we get the benefit of inclusion, it accrues not to a business unit, it accrues not to a specific team, not to a specific group, but to the organization as a whole. And when that comes to us, then it's time for us to stand up and bear these costs of inclusion that there are, so that the hiring managers, the recruiters, people at operating levels are focused on purely hiring the right person for the right job and being able to provide them with the environment that they would thrive in, rather than having to worry about these very, very real considerations. When a manager or a recruiter or a team leader is being assessed on their cost of delivery, which unfairly is loaded with these costs, then I think it becomes a disincentive, and that is a very clear action point for leaders to take. Like you've said, there is a specific place for everybody in this inclusion journey. So leaders need to do different things than what recruiters and managers need to be doing in the course of their work. As I sort of come to the conclusion of the points that I wanted to make, I think it's important also for employers to be able to replicate what they have done well in other business units, in other geographies, and we've seen that being done very successfully in some organizations and not so successfully in others. And that's something where I go back to the last point around the costs and benefits of inclusion. If a particular business unit or a group is doing well, then I think it is important that others learn to do it in the same way. In fact, our belief is that the amount of energy that is put behind trying to create this one organization feel amongst all the employees and staff members, etc., inclusion-related efforts can well and truly be that one common thread that could string the entire team across geographies, across business units. It doesn't matter whether somebody is in client servicing or in back office, if they're in an emerging market, or if they are in a developed nation, or if they work whichever hours they do. The spirit of inclusion and its high-quality execution can be that one thread which would be common to every business unit. And those organizations that have done that well are very clearly able to sharpen their hiring processes to take care of the three biases that I just talked about and other barriers that are out there. I'll just take a pause and most happy to take any questions as we go along. Thank you.
Many thanks for this very good presentation. As we are in India, let me just mention that the ILO Global Business and Disability Network is currently pursuing the establishment of a national business and disability network in India. We have more than 20 networks in different countries in the world, in particular also in developing countries. And this year we have very advanced plans both in China and India. Shashank knows about it, and organizations like Vishish will definitely be involved in these initiatives, and of course the different subsidiaries and branches of GBD and members. We are having more than 100 participants following online this conversation. We had more than 300 people that had expressed their interest and were registered. We hope that many others will also listen to this webinar afterwards because it's being recorded and it will be saved on our website. Shashank, before passing on the floor to Peter Fremlin to take the lead on the Q&A session, I just wanted to have a specific follow-up question to your presentation. Very often when we speak about how one of the key elements of success in terms of promoting disability inclusion within the corporate sector is top-level commitment, commitment by the CEO of a company. Of course, it's very important to have line managers on board, but at the same time, when a message comes from the top, that is also very important. I was in your interaction, in the interaction that you have described with these different companies, how much of your time sort of is invested in getting this buy-in from the top level within the companies, and what are your main ways of getting that top level buy-in?
Stefan, I think there could be, we couldn't underscore more the importance of leadership backing inclusion and disability inclusion efforts. There's no doubt about that. And we spend a fair amount of time talking to leaders and building the business case around disability inclusion. As Eve said earlier, and as we've spoken in some of our other conversations, what leaders want to hear is how does inclusion work for them effectively and assist them in building a better quality business. So I think the story, sympathy, or charity, etc., is that we have to move on from. And we find that almost sort of global 30,000 square, but they are then looking for some very specific thoughts and ideas on how an implementation like this could take place. The other key point that we have found in the course of our work over the last 7 years is that what's very inspiring and keeps us going is the interest that we found first. It's not easy, but honestly, I think inclusion gets delivered from the positions and the actions of these managers. So in many ways, our recommendations to the leadership is to say that just like you would do for any other business conversation, please let your managers execute your strategy. But like you would do with any other business decision, please provide them with everything that they need to be able to effectively execute on the inclusion strategy as well. Which is when, like the issue of costs, for example, right, or time or resources, etc. You cannot have high quality outcomes if you're going to work with subpar inputs or mechanisms available to your teams. So your strategy must be backed by specific and high quality actions that can truly deliver the change that you're hoping to do, and execute it the same way that you're doing as you've been doing for all your business decisions, because that's something that everybody understands. So in more ways than one, the more that inclusion looks like it's a part of work, that it actually leads to improved working environment in the organization and benefits the organization, is the experience that we have had and the specific feedback that we have received from some of the leaders that we've had the chance to work with. I hope this answers your question.
Excellent, yes, for sure. Very good answer to the question. I will now pass on the floor to Peter Fremlin. Peter is a consultant who has been working with the ILO for a number of years. He was also part of our small disability team here in the ILO. Peter is currently based in Egypt, and he was instrumental, and I'm thanking you hereby, in preparing this webinar. Peter, I'm sure you have been following carefully the different questions that we are receiving either via the chat or the Q&A section of our website. I want to hereby also remind people that they have the possibility, and Peter will now, based on the questions we have received in written form, he will now pass on some of those questions to Eve, Shashank, and Anne-Sophie. Peter, over to you.
Thanks so much, Stefan, and thank you for all the speakers for such interesting points. Just to clarify and repeat what Stefan said, We'll be having questions coming in through your chat box if you're connected online. Sorry to those that are connected on their phones, but you could also connect online if that's possible to put in questions there. And it's for technical reasons that it's easier for me to voice those, so to speak. And Sophie, I want to come to you first. Can you tell us a bit more about what the GBDN is doing around attitudes on disability and how you see the Global Business and Disability Network as acting in the areas that we've been talking about in this webinar so far?
Yes. Well, this webinar is really part of what we are doing to show companies the relevance of this subject and how they can approach in its practice. The network develops such contents and technical materials, including video and info story, that we can share all together. For example, within ACCOR, GDBN has developed disability web training, and ACCOR, we thought it was a great training, and we were in touch with the person who did this training to build more globally, not only on disability, but such a training of awareness on how not to discriminate on all kind of diversity. So that means that it's really important because we can share more globally around diversity, inclusion, and thanks to really very good experts. This is my point of view as company, who practice the GDBN networks. Furthermore, I would say that changing attitude and understanding is particularly important in this network. And we did do also a big work on mental health and well-being in the workplace. There have been a work group on that topic that built deliverables and a roundtable. New ways of talking about disability are, I would say, essential part of the way we connect with company. This is present in all our network events. We have an annual event where we have a big roundtable with other companies and a lot of experts, where we share best practice and all concerns that we can have regarding disability everywhere in the world, which is quite important also to have this kind of view, not only in France or UK or US, but like you say, and like we can see today in every part of the world. And another component of changing understanding is business, is the peer-to-peer approach with other companies. So this is what the network is making on the subject. To be short.
Thanks, Anne-Sophie, and that's really great to hear about what the network has been doing is then being taken up in ACCOR hotels and other places as well. That's really nice to hear. Yves, I've got a couple of questions for you. So a bunch of people have raised some important points, and I'm going to put kind of two questions together. One, Jerdy Hodenborn asked, what is it that made IBM decide to give these trainings and promote these things more widely? And then Isabel Archer asked about the involvement of people with disabilities themselves in that development and delivering the strategy.
Thank you, Peter. Both questions are excellent. So basically, when I took up this role 4 years ago, for the reference of the audience, I am myself living with a disability. I became a wheelchair user after a motorcycle accident occurred in 1987. And so I am both personally and professionally, aware of what it means to be an inclusive employee and manager. I used to be in the client-facing position prior to joining the HR community in IBM, so I'm aware of the reality in the business, in terms of pressure, revenues, etc., so productivity, etc. In other words, when I took up this role 4 years ago to become the Global Disability Inclusion Program Manager, I realized pretty rapidly that the major obstacle to a successful work experience for people with disabilities are not really the accommodation or accessibility piece. Although they are extremely important, that require that, these two A's require a lot of, it's quite complex. It requires some investment, human and financial investment to make it happen, to put in place a structured process to provide accommodation in a timely manner, to make sure that our buildings, our workplace, our HR applications, our digital tools are accessible. But they are mainly operational things, whereas changing the mindset of people, and basically the people that do have the hiring authority, in other words, what we call internally the first-line managers, the people that do have the team responsibility, is really the key roadblock, I would say. If you don't change the mindset, if you don't help them to become disability confident, nothing much will happen, simply because you need to have the managers on your side. If you don't have managers that are disability confident, your efforts to be successful, even with the support of the executive team, will be extremely difficult. Acquiring the support of the mid-level management is extremely important. Having said that, we don't live in a perfect world. And so some people will never change, right? Their perceptions of disability is so difficult for them to change because it's their part of their identity that it's extremely difficult. However, it made a lot of sense to really put this training in place. And to answer the second question regarding the involvement of people with disabilities, we have a team of we have 27 business resource groups around the world composed of people with disabilities and what we call allies. In other words, people who do not have disability managers, employees, regardless of their level in the organization, who are member also of the IBM Corporation and the business resource groups, and I've consulted them. I've reached out to them when I was preparing, building, and creating this the face-to-face version to get their feedback about the content, etc. By the way, in the chat, I saw also another question regarding what were the top 2 or 3 concerns from managers who were participating in this workshop. And I think it would be relevant for the whole audience here. Their main concerns are, as I said, quite concrete. It's, like I'm having an employee and I believe this employee is acquiring a disability or is living with a disability. What are the signs that could alert me that my employee is acquiring a disability? What do I do if over the course of a career of one of my employees, he or she is acquiring a disability? What are IBM's recommendation and processes to make sure that we will accommodate that person properly so he can continue to work in IBM? All these kind of very concrete questions. How do I assess the performance? Should I behave differently with a person with a disability when I assess their performance? Very concrete questions.
Thanks, Yves. That's really nice to see your leadership within IBM and beyond on these issues, and to hear that kind of comparison, which echoes and is slightly different from what we heard from Shashank about what things are raised in these meetings. Shashank, coming to you, and I'm going to give you kind of 2 quite hard questions that are coming out. So the first question that a couple of people have raised, including Anna von Bock and Simon Jensen, is kind of how you measure this, sort of how you measure it's happening, at the inclusion in companies, and kind of how you can measure success and inclusive teams. That's one quite big question. And then the second quite big question is about that difference that you mentioned about international companies. And this is something Bradley Frank has raised. International companies might have the kind of commitment on diversity inclusion at corporate level, but then they might be operating in countries where those concepts are a bit new or different, and how they can tackle that. So Shashank, those were kind of two quite hard questions. The first is on how companies can measure it and measure the success, and then the second is how international companies can deal with it across their geographies.
Thanks, Peter. The first one about measurement, and I don't think I can agree more with the fact that only what gets measured gets done. So that's to underscore the importance of measurement. But thinking about how do you measure success, right? So there is the classic developmental framework of input, output, and outcomes, and we can talk about that endlessly. But in practice, we should measure it just the way that we would measure success of our hiring and career development efforts for the talent pool that exists in the company, right? Which means that what percentage of our population in the organization is persons with disabilities. And if it is relatively smaller, then why is that so? What efforts need to be made to reach out, as you would do for any other pool of quality talent, right? Particularly in emerging markets like India, which have very, very large scale hiring that's happening over the last few years. One of the key things that happens because of challenges with infrastructure is that for a very large organization to be able to even receive an application from a person with disability is a reflection of their grit and determination. And a quick look at stats around the education infrastructure would be able to tell you why and how dramatic that impact is. So just that is a reflection of the quality of person that you're engaging with at some level, right? And I would say that the input, output, and outcome piece could be something that's there, but at the headline level, what is the number of people that we've been able to hire? What is it that we are retaining? And how many of them have moved up the chain? So in progressive organizations, we recognize that there is a measurement of how many people we have. But then qualitatively, did they move as fast as everybody else has? Have they been in diverse set of jobs that are available to everybody else? Or, for example, are they being picked for some very select roles which has happened in a lot of other markets? So I think the measurement framework is fairly straightforward, Peter, in some sense, which is around being able to come up with how you would look at any talent pool that you wanted to encourage and attract in any organization anywhere. I don't want to oversimplify it, but I want to say that it's not a good idea to try and attempt anything which is different from the mainline work that the organization does in terms of measuring, mapping, and valuing an important resource that drives the organization. As far as the second piece is concerned, which is, and that's a very, very interesting question around disability inclusion, and as Eve said, and as did Anne-Sophie, around the cultural differences that may exist from the backgrounds. On the other hand, if you look at large brands that deliver services, and particularly consumer services, they aim to deliver the same experience in any part of the world that you might be. I recognize that there would be changes in certain societies. Japan would be different from Brazil, which would be different from India, which would be different from North America. But at the same time, when I was shopping from a very large e-commerce website, they would strive to deliver the same experience. The same way, how is it that the organization could make the same experience when you're recruiting and assisting a person with disability to grow in the company? They should be able to put together the same energy and be able to deliver the outcome in the same way. just like you would do it for your customers. Like in any of the large-scale brands that are out there, and Sophie's here from Accor, and she would be a specialist in how you would be able to get the same experience to a very, very large extent. So to my mind, this is a problem that has been solved in a different context, right? So I agree that there are, well-founded stereotypes perhaps on countries that have certain types of service built into their cultures versus some others that don't or are different in some forms. But how do large organizations deliver consistent experiences all over the world? So to us and our understanding in discussions, these employers, the principles and the building blocks exist. You need to work very hard to customize them. And I'd like to take the liberty of going back to the point I made earlier. You could choose to say that this is incremental cost, or you could recognize that this is the most powerful tool which can bring everybody to think the same way about the organization. So it's about leadership and their perspective on how they see this. Do they see it as a challenge, or do they see this as an opportunity to be able to bring together everybody in the organization across geographies and business groups?
Thank you, Shashank. That was a really sort of in-depth technical summary that you gave, and so that's really, you really sort of mentioned the indicators and the different, how they can sort of capture the different challenges that come up. We don't have so much time left, so I'm going to return to Eve quickly with a final question, and then I'm going to come around all of our speakers for final remarks. Eve, Graham Findlay has asked, so that lots of these strategies for employing disabled people kind of sometimes see a lot of activity in year one, and then a kind of loss of momentum. How do you see that, and what would you do to kind of keep up the momentum over many years?
That is absolutely key. That is a very, very good question. Thank you. Actually, there is no magical recipe, basically. What we do is that we seize each and every opportunity to repeat the message. For instance, we celebrate the International Day of People with Disabilities every December 3rd. We also leverage local events. In many countries you have one day or 1 month that celebrates disability in general. For instance, in the U.S., we have the U.S. Disability and Employment Awareness Month in October. Basically, we try to renew our communication every time we have an opportunity to do so. And in parallel, we also celebrate the business achievements of all employees, including employees that happen to live with a disability. In other words, we do not celebrate disability. We celebrate employees who are successful in the business, who, by the way, have a disability. This is a totally different approach. Versus, instead of celebrating something that we don't want to celebrate, we want to celebrate the success and the talent of our employees. And so this is a very nice way, a smart way, if I may say so, to position disability inclusion in a more advanced way, and more positive way than versus focusing only on the diversity or HR aspects. So in other words, we try to find, and each and every opportunity we have, we come across to say the message, to repeat the message again and again, trying to find innovative ways to do that, and leveraging the business resource groups locally is also extremely important. We organize local events that take, we try to have what we call cross-constituency events. For instance, if another business resource groups dedicated to women, for instance, want to organize something, they will invite the people with disabilities business resource group to take part in the event, and so they co-organize something together. So it's another way to be inclusive of all, and not only inclusive for a specific segment of the IBM population.
Thanks, Eve, and you really show sort of something that you're doing in company and business, but we can use in all areas of work, in disability to kind of change attitudes towards persons with disabilities. We've got 4 minutes left, so I'm going to go very quickly around our speakers for final thoughts. Anne-Sophie, what thought would you like to leave us with very briefly?
Well, very briefly, concerning what just said, I do agree with him that there's not secret or magic recipe to address this topic. It's really, as a big organization, we can say it's always make awareness each time when we can, communicate what happened as best practice in a country that can be repeated in another one, educate people who are disabled, people who don't know what is the disability, because as many people know, only 80% of disability is invisible. That means that you don't know who are the person who are disabled, and it's very important to know that. We have to train people. We also have to showcase, to promote, to make visible people who are successful as disabled within the organization. And maybe the way I see disability as the other, we'll say, area of diversity and inclusion is as a good opportunity to find innovating way either to manage people or clients as well. And when you try to find, can be very successful as well. We have this kind of example with Nacor Hotel when concerning the clients. We have built a new way of a new room, which is the smart room. I would say that the concept of this room is focused at least at first for disabled persons, but in fact we see that this room for clients concerns everybody. So this is, this universal way that I want to live. I mean that when you think about disabled person or diversity, you can find you can be very creative to make not the world better, but yes, your business also better. And this is what I want to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne-Sophie. Unfortunately, we didn't get to all of the questions that we raised, and in the question of time, I'm afraid I'm going to have to skip over final remarks from Shashank and Yves, but we've heard quite a bit from them. So, Stefan, can I hand over to you to close up the webinar and give us a final thought, please?
Yes, thank you, Peter, and thanks everybody for having participated. We have more than 100 people that have been listening in. We are going to ask you to answer a short evaluation form that will pop up immediately, and which will allow us to learn from your feedback in order to improve our webinars for the future if needed. Let me finish with the following reflection. I think we are trying to changing people's perception, people's minds, is one of the most difficult things to do, but also one of the most important things to do in order to promote the inclusion of people with disabilities. And what I find extremely exciting is that while it's important that governments undertake campaigns and disability organizations and all that, when we see companies themselves taking efforts in this dimension, this has an extremely relevant impact, because it comes sometimes as a surprise factor. You're expecting a government to make a campaign, you're expecting a disability organization, but suddenly when you see companies like the examples we've heard today, and there are many more also within the larger network, when companies are engaged in challenging these perceptions and promoting a new way of thinking around disability, that has a very significant impact. So thanks again to the speakers, thanks to Yves, thanks to Shashank, thanks Anne-Sophie, and in particular thanks to all of you who have listened in for the good questions and comments we have received. Everything is recorded, You can watch that at a later stage. And as I mentioned, please send us your comments back through the evaluation form. A good day to everybody. Goodbye.
This concludes today's webinar from the ILO Global Business and Disability Network. Thank you everyone for attending.